Alright guys, welcome back to another one. In today's video, I want to talk about Naughty Dog's next game project, something that a lot of us have been waiting in high anticipation for, to know exactly what the next game from these guys is going to be. And over the past couple of years, there's been talk, speculation, rumors, some stuff that's come from Neil Druckmann himself, but it's still up in the air as to exactly what this might be. I think at this point, a lot of us are leaning towards it being a brand new IP. Some people desperately want it to be The Last of Us Part 3. We're fast approaching half a decade since their last big release, The Last of Us Part 2, with the only two releases coming from Naughty Dog in that time being remasters for Last of Us Part 1 and 2, which most would agree these are completely pointless. So we're definitely hungry to get something new from Naughty Dog. Now I want to put emphasis on new. Ideally, I don't want their next game to be Part 3. Personally, I really enjoy The Last of Us, and I'm eager to see exactly what a third installment would look like. But am I the only one who feels like for almost the past 20 years since the first Uncharted game came out, Naughty Dog has been making the same kind of game? After Jak and Daxter, Uncharted became the primary focus for Naughty Dog, spanning into a pretty big, long-running series. In 2013, we saw the release of The Last of Us, which went above and beyond Uncharted, turning into one of the most iconic video game series. Throughout that PS3 and PS4 era, Naughty Dog started to be known for highly cinematic type video games. Now, there are obvious clear differences between both Uncharted and The Last of Us, but there's also a lot of similarities as well. These are highly cinematic gaming experiences that are based on reality. There are some fictional elements for both Uncharted and obviously The Last of Us, but they most certainly do feel very same-ish. And because this is all that Naughty Dog have focused on for almost 20 years now, it's sometimes hard to believe that games like Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter came from the same studio. I am absolutely desperate for Naughty Dog to return to fiction, to see how a modern Naughty Dog would approach a fantasy title, with both their storytelling expertise and presentation. And presentation is the big one. Naughty Dog games are some of the best looking in the industry. And to see a modern Naughty Dog title running on that engine that created The Last of Us Part 2, but is fictional fantasy with a stylized art direction, could really bring us back to the roots of what made Naughty Dog so great in the first place, especially when looking at Jak and Daxter. In the making of documentary for The Last of Us Part 2 released by Naughty Dog at the beginning of the year, it was mentioned by Neil Druckmann that looking at The Last of Us, there is a third story to tell. A full story has not been written, but the basic concept and the principle of that game has already been established. He also mentioned that there was an idea to make a game revolving around Tommy after the events of the second game, though this is something that is separate to Part 3. For the time being, that idea has been shelved, and he's not sure if it'll end up being a video game or some sort of viewable media like a movie or series. Now, even though The Last of Us Part 2 sparked a lot of controversy online back when it released in 2020, one way or another, this game was a huge success. So no doubt at some point, PlayStation will absolutely want Naughty Dog to develop a third and final chapter. However, from everything that's been said by Neil Druckmann over the past couple of years, it suggests to us that their next game, in fact, actually isn't The Last of Us. Neil Druckmann mentioned at the beginning of the year, via a kind of funny interview, that he's aware people want The Last of Us Part 3. He hears about it all the time, and all he can say is that we're already into our next project. The decision has already been made. We picked the thing we're most excited for. So if you didn't know, yes, Naughty Dog, as of right now, are currently working on whatever the next project is. And looking at how this has been worded by Neil, it doesn't seem as if it's Part 3. Now, there has been a rumor that's recently surfaced to do with Naughty Dog's next title. This has come from the MinMax Show, a podcast of gaming enthusiasts who seemingly do have connections to various different people within the games industry. The host of the show, Ben Hansen, was told by someone who's apparently very much in the know that I heard from someone very in the know who worked on the game that they're like, Jesus Christ. The tone was like, you are all not ready for how amazing this is going to be. And the tone was, I'm not going to say the game that they referenced to compare it, but they compared it to a game with a lot of player freedom. Now, this is a rumor, so naturally, take it with a grain of salt. But personally, I can't help but feel excited over the mention that this next project is being compared to another another game that has a lot of player freedom, because the aspect of player freedom is something that Naughty Dog games have lacked since the departure of Jak and Daxter. Both Uncharted and The Last of Us are very linear, story-driven titles. Part 2 did have a couple of open-ish areas to explore, but still very much linear. Interestingly enough, The Last of Us Part 2 was originally concepted to be an open world title. This was explained by Neil in the Grounded documentary at the beginning of this year. However, they decided to return to linear level design as it better suited the story they were trying to tell for Part 2. We also know that the scrapped Last of Us multiplayer game that was announced to be dead in the water in December of last year appeared as if it was going to take place in an open world San Francisco, potentially taking some of those ideas that they had for an open world version of Last of Us to be applied into the multiplayer project. I am thankful that this project closed down, although the idea of a multiplayer Last of Us is pretty exciting. This would have launched as a live service game, and we know the unfortunate fate of when PlayStation attempt to create a live service title. Ideally, it's just better if Naughty Dog apply their resources to what they do best, single player experiences. And I'm glad this is the decision that ultimately both PlayStation and Naughty Dog made. So with the mention of this new game being compared to one that has a lot of player freedom, this instantly makes me think of either Zelda Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, or of course Elden Ring. And I think it's Elden Ring. Within the Grounded documentary, Neil also made the interesting mention of Bloodborne and how that game actually inspired parts of The Last of Us Part 2. This certainly tells us that some of the Naughty Dog team are actually fans of From Software. FromSoft are master crafters in their own right, and especially with the 2021 release of Elden Ring and how they tackled open world, no doubt Naughty Dog would be looking at something like Elden Ring and how it approaches open world with a lot of player freedom as a source of inspiration for whatever this next game might be. If this information truly is correct, this tells us that the next Naughty Dog game is going to be a very different one compared to what we've been so used to looking at both Uncharted and The Last of Us. And honestly, that gets me really excited. We've been so used to the same thing coming from these guys for way too long. And looking at both Uncharted and The Last of Us, yes, they are definitely works of art. These are incredibly gorgeous games with some pretty top-notch stories. But to see a fiction coming from them in the same vein as something like Jak and Daxter in modern times could absolutely be peak video game. Of course, knowing myself, in a perfect world, this would be a new Jak and Daxter game. Naughty Dog obviously still own the rights to Jak and Daxter. This is still very much their IP. And yeah, if they wanted to, if they got together and said, hey, why don't we attempt that Jak 4 that we were looking at creating shortly before that was scrapped and it was turned into the first Last of Us game. And obviously, if Big Daddy PlayStation were all good with it, then yeah, we could very much have a Jak 4. Jak fans are desperate to get a new piece of Jak and Daxter content. However, I hate to say it, although Naughty Dog still do acknowledge Jak and Daxter, which is great, I don't think this is a new Jak game. At this point, I think the only way we're going to see the return of Jak and Daxter is if PlayStation decide to hand off the IP to a different studio to develop. While I definitely want to see The Last of Us Part 3 somewhere later on down the line, it's exciting to know that there's about an 80% chance that this isn't Last of Us and is finally rather something new. One last thing to do with this new project is recently a new job listing popped up for Naughty Dog where they're looking for someone with experience working on action adventure games in both third or first person. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that this next game is going to be first person or will have the option to go into that perspective, but it's some interesting food for thought, because if there is the option to go into first person view, then yeah, this would be the very first Naughty Dog game to ever do that. I will say too, just with like how atmospheric and gorgeous Naughty Dog games are, there would be zero complaints from me receiving a Naughty Dog game that allows you to go into first person, because oh my god. We've got no idea how long this next project has been in development for. I would say at the absolute most 3 years or something like that, especially because a lot of Naughty Dog's resources were spent working on the cancelled Last of Us multiplayer project, so it's probably going to be quite some time before we see what this game is. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video. Be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section down below. I'd love to know. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything going on here. Check out my other garbage social media platforms. A big thank you to my wonderful Turkey-tastic patrons. I hope you're all having a fantastic day, and we'll talk real soon.